Hello, this is Ron. Well, it was not intended, but we are taking a break this week on Ron's Amazing Stories. Not to worry, all is well, and if the truth be told, a week off will do nothing but good things for all involved. We'll return next week with a completely new show, and if everything goes as planned, it will be The Horror Express number 16. Jason and I will be answering a horde of questions, have an old-time radio show about shadow people, and take a special look at episode number 17. As always, we do have a podcast for you this week. We will replay one of my favorite episodes from 2016. One program note, in this episode, we talk to Debra Yates. At the time this podcast was recorded, her book wasn't available. Since that time, not only is the book, A Woman of Many Names, available, she came back on the podcast to talk about it. You can listen to that podcast by going to Ron's Amazing Stories and listening to episode number 259. I hope you do that. That was a fun show, too. Now, on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. Now this is a jam-packed episode. So much stuff. We have Debra Yates here to talk about her new book. We have a Gunsmoke episode where a young boy wreaks havoc on Dodge City. And we took a look at The Trail of Tears from the point of view of the poets. Now that's a lot of stuff, so we best saddle up and ride.
What's that you say?
We have a special guest to meet, Ms. Debra Yates. She is the author of the new book called Woman of Many Names. She was raised in Mansfield, Ohio, and currently lives in St. Petersburg, Florida. One day, a cousin called her and told her about a historical marker in Tennessee. This led Debra on an adventure of a lifetime, the discovery of her family history. Her novel chronicles the life of the seventh great-grandmother, Nancy Ward. This amazing Cherokee woman played a role in the Revolutionary War, had ties to Daniel Boone, and traded letters with George Washington. She's been memorialized in Benton, Tennessee, was known to her people as Nanyehi, and she foretold one of the greatest American tragedies, the Trail of Tears. The even more amazing part is she's not in the history books, but her stories remain. Nancy stands as a role model akin to that of Joan of Arc. Now, with all of that said, I want to welcome Debra Yates to the podcast. Welcome, Debra.
Thank you, Ron. How are you today?
I'm doing quite well, and you know what? In all the years I'm doing that, you're the first person to ask me that question.
Oh.
How about that?
I heard that I did something nobody else has done.
So, we've heard a little bit in the introduction there. We heard a little bit about you. Let's hear the Debra Yates story. How did you get interested in writing first? And how did you end up finding out all about your grandmother? That's just an amazing story on its own.
Well, when I was a young child, at approximately 13, I found out that I was Cherokee descent. And it had been, I want to say, kind of like something that our family didn't discuss back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even the 60s. Being a Native American was not something that you went around talking about because there was a lot of discrimination during those time periods. My grandma and grandpa were very humble people. They had humble beginnings, and they were quite poor. And my mother and her family were raised with not a lot of the privileges in life that most people enjoy. When I was around 13 years old, I started having these dreams about an Indian lady standing on a hill and looking down into a valley. And I told my mom, I said, I had this crazy dream last night. She said, oh, you did? What was it? So I told her the dream, and she just said, oh, that's interesting. About 3-4 weeks later, I had the dream again, and I told her again, I had this dream, Mom, and it was so vivid and so real. And she said, oh, well, that's very nice. And then a few more weeks later, I had the same dream again. And I went to my mother and I said, I keep having this dream about an Indian lady standing on top of a hill, and she moves her arm across the hill and the valley, and there's these teepees down there. She goes, all right, doggone it, you're Native American, and I don't want to talk about it. Don't tell anybody. And I went, what? And so I said, where does this come from? And she goes, well, your grandfather actually lived on the reservation in Oklahoma, and that's where he came from. And I went, oh, my word, what a neat story. So when I saw my grandpa the next time, I said, Grandpa, I said, tell me these stories. I had no idea we were Cherokee. And he said, well, yeah, and you come from a great line. Your great-great-great-grandmother was a very famous chief amongst our people. Her name was Nanyehi. And so the stories I learned were of Nanyehi. And so when I turned 13, he gave me a stone that had actually belonged to this grandmother. And he said, nobody in the family seems to be excited about being Native American but you. And you being the oldest granddaughter, this should come to you. So he had a beautiful chunk of jade that he had inlaid into a copper bracelet. And he told me the significance of what copper meant to our people, and that it was used for healing and for sore muscles and stuff like this, and I should wear this bracelet. I said, oh, this is so cool. So I did. I wore that bracelet for years, every day. And when I turned 16, he gave me an arrowhead, and he said this was one of the grandmother's possessions also. These are the only two things that I inherited that came from her, and I want you to have it also. So when I turned 18, somewhere around there, I had it mounted on a beautiful turquoise necklace, and I have worn it ever since.
When did you discover your 7-time great-grandmother was an historical character?
Probably about 8-9 years ago. And at that point, I had a cousin that called me, and she said, our Native American grandma, well, her American name is Nancy Ward. And I said, yeah, I saw that on the genealogy paperwork that came from some of Grandpa's family. She says, well, she's got a park in Benton, Tennessee, and a boat ramp. Can you go there? Honey, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and there is no good way to get to Tennessee from here. I said, where's it at? And she said, well, it's in Benton, Tennessee. I said, well, let me think on it. So I thought on it overnight, and when I woke up in the morning, I felt I heard a message that told me that the old one was more important now. So I called her and I said, I'm on my way. Give me the particulars.
So what did you do?
I drove 8 hours from Charleston, South Carolina.
Wow.
When I got there, it was, just about dusk, and I pull up there, and it's her burial site. And I went, I am so not believing this. So I take a walk up the hill. She's buried underneath a cedar tree on top of the hill on the Ocoee River, which is one of the most beautiful places in Tennessee you've ever seen. And they do a lot of whitewater rafting there and things like that. So I walked up that hill, and my whole life just started to make sense. The things that I loved in life, trees and stone and boulders and rocks and hills and just everything. I became a landscaper in life, and so I never understood why I was so drawn to that part of nature and knew about it. I did not study it in college. It was just something I fell into, and that's just what happened. And
that is so cool. How did you feel?
I felt that I was called. I had impressions while I was there, and I just knew this woman, and I knew her to the very pit of my soul.
Going back to the park itself, did something happen at that particular park? Is there a reason she was buried there?
She was originally interned or buried a few miles up the road. And somewhere in the very early 1900s, they sold the land that she was buried on, and they moved them. And when they moved them, the Daughters of the American Revolution erected a monument there to her honor. There is a chapter, the Nancy Ward chapter, that is based there in Tennessee. There's actually old pictures of the ladies in the long skirts and with their parasails and their beautiful straw hats, dedicating this park and area there along the Ocoee. According to Native American tradition, we would not bury our people close to a raging river, which the Ocoee can be, of course, at many times. We would bury our people high above a tributary, a creek, so to speak, so that you wouldn't be as likely to have your burial site disturbed. So when that land was sold, it actually became a jailhouse area.
Why there? Did she have some property nearby?
My grandmother was granted land by the American government, several hundred acres, which would have encompassed basically all of Benton, Tennessee. We had the lands that went from the Ohio all the way down to Georgia. That was Cherokee Nation land. That's where the Cherokee lived. As time progressed and the white men were encroaching more and more, they wanted those lands. So my grandmother actually sold Kentucky, which would have been the way the Native Americans would have said it, to the Transylvania Company, which was basically headed by a notorious fellow called Daniel Boone. And so she negotiated with him, Attakulla and Daniel Boone.
No, wait a minute. Your grandmother negotiated with Daniel Boone?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you have some pretty amazing historical ties there. She did some amazing stuff. How would she have been involved?
Yes, sir. She sure did. The way that would have worked back then, there was many treaties that needed to be signed. And up in Sycamore Shoals and up in the Kingsport, Tennessee area, they negotiated treaties that actually allowed George Washington to have more free reign through those territories, and I believe actually helped him win the Revolutionary War. Yeah, she was an amazing, amazing woman, chief negotiator, healer. She had the gift of sight and precognition. She was trained from basically birth. Her birth was foretold through a legend amongst our people. She was born into the Wolf Clan. Her grandfather was the great chief Matoy or Moytoy. King Charles III declared my 8 times great-grandfather the Emperor of America. So he was who they did the negotiations with territories here. Actually demanded that my 8 times great-grandfather Matoy come to England to meet him. Him being a fox, the old fella, decided that he was not going to go. He wasn't going to leave his people here because, you know, it was the Cherokee Nation, for goodness sakes, and he was a king too, and he couldn't leave his people like that. So he recruited 2 of his sons to go on a ship called the Fox that went to England in the late 1600s. They just had a marvelous time going to England.
All of that is absolutely fascinating. Does the book cover all of this, what you've been telling us, or is it specific to your great-great-great-great-grandmother?
Well, my book basically encompasses from birth to about 19 years of age. This first book that I've written. There may be a follow-up to this one that will go over more of the things that we've discussed in history. Daniel Boone is in this book, but of course a lot of the other historical figures would not enter until after the age of 19, well into her 30s, as she became more and more of a leader amongst the Cherokee Nation there in Tennessee.
Is the book kind of what we would call a historical fiction then? Is that where we would put this in the category of?
We haven't exactly come up with a category yet that decided to publish under, but yes, I believe it is going to be historical fiction. What I've done is weave together stories that were told to me by my grandfather, by his brothers and sisters, and some of his cousins. This progressed and looked like it was going to become a book. I started doing more research on her that I could find in written books and on the internet and so on and so forth. So what I did was I weaved all that together, and some of it, I believe, was given to me from her even. As times that I just felt her spirit would just literally lay on my soul, and I would write, I believe, what she wanted me to write. So it's sort of a compilation of all that. So yes, it's going to have to go down, I believe, as a fictional work, even though it is based on facts. Some of it I can prove, and some of it I'm not going to be able to prove. Amongst the Indian people, we did not write very much, even though the Cherokee did create the first Native American syllabary. Mm-hmm. It was an oral tradition. You told the stories. The older people would sit around the campfire and teach the young the stories from the ancient times and from long ago. So it's a compilation of all that put together.
Was it difficult to try to weave it into the historical, or did it just all mesh and fit?
It all meshed. I believe that, God gives us messages. We either listen or we don't. And through that time, I was very in tune with the story, and it just seemed to all come together. So it didn't seem to be a problem meshing the two together. I first wrote down the stories that I had been told from my family. Then I researched, and then I went back and edited in the different stories where they would apply. It's hard to explain where something comes from.
I think I get it. So you found an historical event that occurred, and that it matched up with the story that either your ancestors told or you found through research. You were able to find a slot that fit that in history. Is that pretty much what you're...
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah, and I think that sounds really exciting. I had a gentleman that on the show, and he's unfortunately passed now, but he wrote exactly the same way what you've done with the Crusades, and he plugged in a fictional character to the Crusades. I think that's fantastic. I can't wait to get my hands on this book. Now, when is it going to be available? I know it's not out there yet.
In the fall of 2016, it should be in release then, and there'll be several places that you'll be able to go. I have a website. It's called Woman of Many Names.
That's the name of the book, right? Woman of Many Names?
Yeah. She had approximately 13 of them that I found so far.
So it'll be available then. Would you be willing to come back to the show then when the book is actually published so we can talk about the writing? Because I am absolutely fascinated on how you mixed the history with we'll call it lore rather than fiction. How's that?
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, and I'd love to have you come back so we could talk about the writing of the book. Because I know you were telling me that the book kind of wrote itself in the form of journals. You just started keeping track of some of these dreams, then more or less ended up writing a book doing that, correct?
That's basically exactly what happened. I wanted to make sure that the stories that my grandfather and his family had told me got to my great-nieces and great-great-great-nieces and nephews. So I thought the only way that's going to happen is if I write it down. So I started, writing that way. As I worked on those, my girlfriend said, "Oh, well, let me type that up for you and put it in a computer so you can go back and add to it." And I said, "Oh, that'd be nice." So I hand her these 6 tablets, and she goes, "Oh my goodness, date them all, number them all for me." Okay. So that's how that worked out. And then when she brought the writings back to me, she handed them to me, and she started crying. And I said, "Oh my gosh, Sandy, what's wrong?" And she said, "This is beautiful, and it needs to be a book. This story needs to be heard, Deborah." And I said, "Oh, Sandy, get out of here." And she says, No, I'm serious. This needs to be a book, and it needs to be published." And I went, okie dokie. So it kind of traveled from there, and had a few people that my life close enough to me that have read it and are just amazed that I have that in me. So anybody can write. I was never thought of myself as an author, and now I'm being told I'm an author. So it just kind of happens that way sometimes.
Well, and that's the way it is that when you have something that you're passionate about, that's when the writing comes out. And I think every writer on the planet would agree with that. So, Debra, I got to say, it is such a pleasure to hear the stories. And when you come back, maybe we can hear a couple of the specific stories, and we'll have a book to look at, too, so that we can talk about the writing.
I can't wait for you to see the artwork. The cover for that is on Woman of Many Names, what the cover artwork is going to be.
I have it. Your publicist sent it to me.
Oh, wonderful. Dawn Fisher, she is a local artist. She's actually fairly famous in her own right, did those for me, and she did other things that are going to be in the book, too. So I'm just super excited for her artwork to be out there in print form and instead of just hanging on my wall. So I'm excited for her, too.
Well, Debra, I'm excited about the book, and I'm going to say that I think my listeners will be too, after hearing kind of the background of where it all came from and knowing that you're okay. How many greats is it? Let's get that right.
She is my 7 times great grandmother. Her American name, Nancy Ward.
You know what's truly amazing about this? That even though all of these centuries have passed, the story still remains. Isn't that something?
It's just remarkable that any part of this has survived. I know that she wrote a letter to George Washington. It would have been in the early maybe around 1800. That letter disappeared. Nobody could find it. And many, many years later, it was found in Thomas Jefferson's personal possession.
Wow.
So one president had to have handed it to another president. It's amazing. You won't find much about Nancy Ward and George Washington other than that there was a letter written to her, but from her to him. Back in that time era, a woman being known as a chief and negotiator wouldn't be something men would be overly happy about, I wouldn't think.
Oh, no, not at all. Although, they say that George Washington was revolutionary in many ways other than just doing a revolution. Well, Debra, thank you again for being with us today. And I look forward to the book. I'll be watching for it. And we got to stay in touch. That way, when it is out there, you can contact me and we'll get you back to talk about the book.
Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you today. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
That was pretty cool. I want to thank Debra for being on the show today. The book, The Woman of Many Names, is not yet available, but it has gone to the publisher. It should be out by the end of 2016. We'll have her back then and maybe get a few of her 7th great-grandma's stories. Today, in keeping with the theme of the show, I have a Gunsmoke episode with a problem. A young boy raised by the Cheyenne is forced to make a choice between his adopted family or life with his off-the-reservation tribe. Now, Gunsmoke was famous for dealing with tough issues and never shied away from making statements with their scripts. The story is called Indian White and is one of the better episodes produced by Meston and Company. I think you're going to enjoy it. It first aired on September 24th, 1955.
Gunsmoke, brought to you by L&M Filters. This is it. L&M is best. Around Dodge City and in the territory on West, there's just one way to handle the killers and the spoilers, and that's with a U.S. Marshal and the smell of Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke, starring William Conrad. The transcribed story of the violence that moved west with young America. And the story of a man who moved with it.
I'm that man. Matt Dillon, United States Marshal. The first man they look for and the last they want to meet. It's a chancy job, and it makes a man watchful. And a little lonely. You got the time, Chester?
Why, Mr. Dillon?
Why? I'd just like to know what time it is, that's all.
Well, yes, sir, I figured that. But I wondered how important it is.
Well, it isn't this important, Chester, believe me.
Well, see, if it was, I could run over to Mr. Hightower's and find out.
Mr. Hightower?
Yes, sir. His watch broke down, and he sent it to St. Louis to get fixed, so I give him the loan of mine. But I can still go in and look at it whenever I need to.
Oh, well, that's a very good arrangement, Chester.
Yes, sir. I figured time's a whole lot more important to a man like him than 'tis to me. It ain't but seldom it matters none one way or the other where I'm concerned. You understand?
Oh, I surely do. Yes, I do. I understand, Chester. Yeah.
Why did you want to know, Mr. Dillon? I mean, about what time...
You're making me sorry I asked, Chester, but I'm supposed to meet a man at the Dodge House at 2 o'clock.
Oh, well, it ain't nowheres near 2 o'clock yet.
Well, how do you know?
The sun. It lacks 15 minutes of being 2 o'clock.
Chester.
Yes, sir?
Why don't you sell that watch to Mr. Hightower?
Oh, I wouldn't want to sell that watch. My Uncle Arthur gave me that watch, Mr. Dillon. He got it from a fellow on the
Now,
upper
get out
Rappahannock
and stay out. And don't you come back in this store ever again.
Mr. Jonas,
Don't talk back to me now. Now, just get.
what's that Indian kid up to now?
I told you he's not an Indian. Hey, boy! Hey, boy!
Oh, look at him go. He ain't waiting for nobody.
Look, Chester, there'll be a man called Davis waiting for me at the Dodge House. Will you go tell him I'll be along directly?
Yes, sir.
Oh, hello, Marshal. For a minute there, I thought it was that Indian kid back.
He ran on down the street, Mr. Jonas.
You ought to do something about him, Marshal.
Oh, why?
Well, you heard about them Cheyenne busting out of Fort Dodge yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, I heard.
Well, wait till they massacre some people around here. Then what'll folks think of that boy running loose?
Why should they think anything?
He's an Injun, ain't he? He's a Cheyenne.
No. His name's Cullen, and he's white.
The Army found him with them Injuns, didn't they?
The Indians stole him from Miss Cullen 8 years ago, down on the Medicine River. You know that.
I don't know it. Now, I hear it ain't her kid at all. He sure don't look like her.
Why did you throw him out of here, Mr. Jonas?
He was trying to buy ammunition for his Sharp's rifle.
What?
Said Miss Cullen one. Now, you know that's a lie. I'm telling you, Marshal, what with them Cheyenne loose, it ain't safe having a boy like that around. You ought to lock him up.
He's not supplying the Cheyenne, Jonas, and don't worry about them. Colonel Honeyman's got 2 troops out after him.
You'll never catch him again. And I mean it about that boy, Marshal. You better lock him up before somebody knocks his brains out. There's a lot of talk about him.
Well, I don't want to hear any more of it. That boy's got a hard enough time ahead of him as it is.
Mr. Dillon?
Yeah, what, Chester?
That Indian kid, he's starting a fight with some man.
What?
Yes, sir. Right in front of the Dodge House. And, Mr. Dillon, that little boy's got a knife as long as his arm.
Who is that man, Chester?
I never seen him before, but I hear he's been plaguing that boy lately.
So the boy came looking for him with a knife, huh?
Hey, that man's got a knife out now.
All right, hold it, mister.
Let him alone,
Get out
Marshal.
of my way, please. Move aside there. All right, drop the knife, mister.
Not hardly.
Drop it.
No. His kid's been asking for it. He started this.
What's the matter with you, fighting a boy?
Dirty little savage.
Grab the boy, Chester.
That's where I got him.
All right, drop the knife, mister.
He cut me. You saw him. I'll open him up like a melon.
No, you won't.
What's the matter with you, Marshal?
I'll keep this knife. And if you're hurt so bad, go see Doc.
You're going to wish you hadn't mixed in this.
Am I? All right, I'll take the boy's knife, Chester.
Here he is.
All right, son. You come with me. I'm going to take you home before you kill somebody.
Take it easy, Mom. You know your young folks are going to eat when you give them sugar crinkles for breakfast. Yes, boys and girls love sugar crinkles. And no wonder. It's the sugar rice treat that's just right sweet. Makes breakfast more fun than a circus. Now, the reason sugar crinkles suit your folks to a T is this. Some sugar-coated cereals they've tried seem too sweet. Others don't seem sweet enough. But when they dip their first spoonful of sugar crinkles, they've discovered a sugar-coated cereal that's just right sweet. And say those young folks of yours love to dip into the pack and eat sugar crinkles as a snack, too. So better get several packages. And now...
You want to talk about it, son?
Name Viho Khan.
Viho Khan, huh? Does that mean something to Cheyenne?
Mean white boy.
Oh, I see. Well, Viho Khan, you want to tell me why you fought that man?
Man talk bad to me. Hit me in mouth. Kick me. Different man give me big knife. Then I fight. You stop or I'll kill him. Make big coup.
You're not a brave, Viho Khan. You're not an Indian. You're white. You got to remember that.
Viho Khan have many Indian brothers.
Ah, but you're home now. You're living among white men. You have a white mother. And you got to stop thinking like an Indian or you're going to get into real trouble.
Mrs. Cullen talk hard at Viho Khan for fight. No understand.
Ah, she'll understand, all right. That's why I came home with you. Now, let's go in and I'll tell her that it wasn't your fault.
That you, Dennis? Where have you been? Oh, Marshal Dillon. Come in.
Hello, Miss Cullen.
Came home with Dennis?
Name Viho Khan. No Dennis.
Please, Dennis. Let's don't argue that now. And look at you. Where are your shoes?
No wear shoes.
Your shirt. What made you such nice shirts? You can't run around in nothing but a pair of pants. Oh, you'll be the death of me yet, Marshal.
No do harm to you.
Oh, I know that, Dennis. You just don't understand yet, do you? You go to your room now and put on those shoes the soldiers give you. And a shirt, too, a nice blue shirt,
I go.
And take that arrow point out of your hair. Sit down, Marshal.
Oh, thank you, ma'am.
It's not easy. A woman at 40, a widow, raising a boy like that.
No, ma'am, I know.
But I want to. And I've got to.
What? What do you mean, Miss Cullen?
He's a white boy. Anybody can see that. But he isn't mine, Marshal.
What?
I knew he wasn't the first day I went to Fort Dodge to see him. He's not my son. But he's the same age, and I've given him the same name, and I
treat him just like he was. No, he won't suffer for lack of a mother's love, I promise that.
I'm sure he won't, ma'am.
Why did you bring him home, Marshal?
You heard about the Cheyennes, the band he was taken with?
They'd broken out of Fort Dodge.
Well, the boys heard it too, Miss Cullen.
Why do you say that?
Ma'am, you own a Sharp's rifle.
Well, yes. It was Mr. Cullen's. The very one he died fighting with on the Medicine River. But why?
Well, Dennis tried to buy ammunition for it today.
What?
Mr. Jonas thinks he's planning to help those Indians.
But how? What could he do?
I don't know. But until they're rounded up again, a lot of people in Dodge are going to be pretty jumpy. Some of them have already caused trouble for the boy.
They have.
He got into a fight with a grown man today. And he cut him up some.
Oh, no.
Wasn't his fault, Miss Cullen, but well, that's the sort of thing that can happen more and more.
If you're saying I should give him up, I won't.
No, ma'am.
He needs his own people. He needs a mother, just like my own boy needs one. If he's still alive somewhere.
All I'm saying, ma'am, is that you got to keep him here at the house till that scare about the Cheyenne is over. If you let him run around town, I'm going to have to lock him up for his own protection.
Mr. Dillon?
What? Oh, that's Chester.
Come in, Chester.
Thank you.
Why, Colonel Honeyman.
I'm sorry to intrude, ma'am. Hello, Marshal.
Colonel?
I'd like to talk to the boy, Mrs. Cullen.
Talk to
Was there something wrong, Colonel?
You know who Little Wolf is?
He's chief of the Cheyenne on the Darlington Reservation, isn't he?
They were at Darlington. We just had word they've broken out and are headed this way. 300 of them.
Oh, I see.
Obviously, they're coming to meet the Indians who escaped Fort Dodge yesterday.
What does this have to do with your wanting to talk to Dennis, Colonel?
I want him to tell me where their point of rendezvous is.
How would Dennis know?
Well, Indians scatter when they're being pursued, Mrs. Cullen. They secretly regroup at a given point later, and every man, woman, and child of them knows well in advance where that point is.
But Dennis isn't... I'll call him. Dennis? Dennis? You call Viho Please, son. It's Dennis now. Come in here. Colonel Honeyman wants to talk to you.
Hello, boy.
Soldier? Want to talk with me?
Yes. Tell me, do you know Little Wolf?
Little Wolf Chief. Good chief.
He was, maybe, but he's done a bad thing now.
No.
He left reservation. He's going to join Long Knife.
Long Knife, my chief. Dennis, don't say that.
Let him talk, Miss Cullen.
Long Knife escape.
Yes. He and the others you were with burned their barracks at Fort Dodge and killed 3 soldiers.
Viho no.
Well, I'm sure you do. And you also know where Long Knife is meeting Little Wolf and his people. If you tell me, you'll save lives, Viho Khan. Not only of those soldiers, but of those of your people, too.
Colonel.
Please, Miss Cullen.
Tell me, Viho Khan.
Dennis not no meeting place.
Well, you can't beat it out of him, Colonel.
No. Well, I'm sorry to have bothered you, Mrs. Cullen. Goodbye.
I'll go with you, Colonel. Miss Cullen, will you remember what I said?
I'll keep an eye on him, Marshal.
Fine.
Goodbye.
Miss Cullen.
Chester.
That was a waste of time.
Well, what are your plans now, Colonel?
Plans? Marshal, I was down to half strength when Long Knife broke out. And now, with 2 troops after him, I haven't enough men left for the post-fatigue detachments. let alone to scout the country.
You, want civilian help?
No. It'd only end in a massacre of some kind. So I'll have to do the best I can.
Well, good luck.
Yeah. Oh, that boy could have helped. Hey, you better keep a close watch on him, Marshal. Well, let's get back to the fort, Sergeant.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Dillon,
Yeah, what, Chester?
I've been thinking. If the Army had left them Indians alone in the first place, they wouldn't be in all this trouble.
Yeah. But that's not for us to decide. All right, let's go.
Well, now, Kitty, how about you? More coffee?
No thanks, Doc.
You, Matt?
Yeah, I think I'll have some, Doc. Just a little.
Good.
You know, that coffee's 3 parts chicory and 1 part lye.
That's why it needs a little cream, Kitty. It softens it a bit.
Kind of hard on the cream.
We should have gone up to my office. I'd have made us some real coffee.
Now, why didn't you ask us up to supper, Doc?
Oh, so I said coffee, not a whole meal.
Oh, I'd have cooked it, Doc.
Oh, you on that stove of mine, you would have.
Yeah. You know I learned to cook on an open fire?
You did?
Not out in the prairie, in a fireplace. We couldn't afford a stove. In fact, we couldn't afford much of anything we couldn't pick up off the ground.
Well, you're rich now.
Oh, sure.
Marshal.
Miss Cullen. What's the trouble?
He's gone, Marshal.
What?
Dennis, he's gone.
Well, gone where?
I don't know.
Well, where did you see him last?
After supper, we ate early, and then I had a talk with him. I told him how much I love him and how I need him. And then I told him about how people in Dodge feel right now. And until things changed, he'd have to stay at home. Well, he didn't say much, but he went to his room, and I sat out on the porch for a while. Then I heard a noise out back. And when I looked, he was gone.
Maybe he just wandered around somewhere.
No, he's gone.
Well, how do you know?
That arrow point he always wants to tie in his hair. He took that, Marshal.
So?
That isn't all. He took his horse, too. He's gone to join the Cheyenne, Marshal. And you've got to go after him, right now.
Mother, it does your heart good, I know, when your young folks eat all of their breakfast cereal. That's why I'm so happy to tell you about new Sugar Crinkles. Sugar Crinkles, you know, is the sugar rice treat that's just right sweet. Crisp, golden nuggets of sugar-coated rice. They make breakfast more fun than a circus. Why, young folks love Sugar Crinkles so much, they disappear like magic. Now, you've had experience with sugar-coated cereals that seem too sweet to you, and others that just don't seem sweet enough to the youngsters. Well, what a wonderful surprise Sugar Crinkles will be to your whole family. For new Sugar Crinkles really are just right sweet. Remember, Sugar Crinkles make great snacks, too. Better get several packages.
For your breakfast or a snack, you love Sugar Crinkles. Sugar Crinkles can't be beat. Sugar rice treat that's just right sweet.
With milk for the breakfast joy.
As a snack from the pack, oh boy! Can't be beat, just right sweet. Sugar Crinkles, good
to eat.
Now back to...
There was no way to pick up the boy's trail that night. But next morning, Chester and I rode out after him. We tracked him all that day, all the next. Southeast, into the Gypsum Hills country. The land was different down there, dotted with buttes and cut by narrow, winding canyons. This was ambush country, and ideal for what Colonel Honeyman called a rendezvous point. We traveled slowly, eyes open, ready for trouble. And then finally, the trail led down into a rocky canyon. And at the bottom, we found the boy, crouched over a small fire.
He acts like he's waiting for us, Mr. Dillon.
I wish he'd waited somewhere more open. I don't like being boxed up down here.
I got kind of a spooky feeling, too.
Yeah. All right, let's leave him here, Chester.
All right, sir.
Marshal make long ride. Catch Vihokan.
Well, you travel fast, son.
White lady send Marshal.
Miss Cullen's mighty worried about you.
Soldier. He worry too?
Now, Colonel Honeyman didn't send me.
He follow?
No, he didn't follow.
Silaho! Niyava!
What's he yelling about?
Look over there, Chester.
Over what? Oh, my goodness. Indians. Oh, there must be 20 of them.
Don't move.
Oh, I ain't about to.
Yeah, they're warriors. Every one of them.
My name, Little Wolf.
That's the chief Colonel Honeyman said was meeting them Cheyenne that busted out of Fort Dodge.
Yeah, and the boy knew where they were meeting all the time.
You tell Vihokan soldiers not follow.
The soldiers are hunting for you, Little Wolf, but they're not with us.
Daishlayi. Naya.
Vihokan say Little Wolf can believe Marshal.
You can believe me. We came alone. We came to take the boy back home.
Vihokan no like life with white man.
Well, he'll get used to it. He belongs with his own people, Little Wolf.
Little Wolf say all men free. Vihokan must make own choice.
He's too young. He doesn't know what's best for him.
If he make mistake, his mistake. Boy never become man. Other people make choice for him.
Little Wolf, this boy's not an Indian. He's white. And if he stays with you and Long Knife, you know what'll happen to him.
He live like Indian.
He'll die like an Indian, too. The soldiers are after you, and sooner or later they'll find you. And when they do, there'll be a big battle, and many of your people will die. Perhaps the boy will die with him.
Vihokan not afraid.
You're white, Vihokan. You're not an Indian. This is not your fight.
White people treat Vihokan bad. Kick, beat, call names. Mrs. Cullen no understand Vihokan. Nobody understand.
Well, it takes time, Vihokan.
Boy decide. If want to come with Cheyenne, you no stop.
Now, we'd have a hard time, 2 against 20.
If you fight, we kill you.
Look, son, before you decide, you remember these Indians are poorly armed. Probably a lot of them are sick. When winter comes, many will die, and the soldiers will get to rest.
Soldier not like Indian. Soldier get tired. Go back. Indian go north. Powder River home. Hunt. Fish again. White people not my people. Vihokan stay with Indian.
Vihokan decide. Leave now. Maybe someday come back. Great chief.
Not with the army chasing you.
Medicine River, Vihokan. The other, move out.
Did you hear what he said?
Yeah. Medicine River Vihokan. Medicine River White Boy.
Ain't that where Miss Cullen lost her son?
Yeah.
Then he is her boy after all.
And she didn't recognize him. He must have changed a lot.
You gonna tell her?
No, Chester. No. I'm not going to tell her.
Gunsmoke, produced and directed by Norman MacDonald, stars William Conrad as Matt Dillon, U.S. Marshal. The special music for Gunsmoke was composed and conducted by Rex Corey. Sound patterns by Bill James and Ray Kemper. Featured in the cast were Sammy Ogg, Virginia Gregg, Joseph Kearns, Harry Bartell, John Daner, and Ralph Moody. Harley Bear is Chester, Howard McNear is Doc, and Georgia Ellis is Kitty.
Now that was a good story. I looked through quite a few Gunsmoke episodes before picking this one to play today. I wanted one with a Native American theme. While listening to the various programs, one thing became crystal clear. The Gunsmoke writers had a healthy attitude towards the Indian condition. They didn't pull punches when it came to the truth on how the nations were mistreated. I wonder if they ever took any flack for that. If they did, I couldn't find any record of it. High praises for excellent writing was all that I found. And that's a good thing.
As read by. Amazing stories read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have a couple of poems. During the podcast, you've heard references to the Trail of Tears. You might be asking what it was. In October of 38, the Cherokees began to walk the Trail of Tears. Most of them made the 1,000-mile journey to Oklahoma on foot. An estimated 4,000 people died en route. The soldiers escorted the Cherokees by bayonet point. They refused permission for the dead to be buried, threatening to shoot anyone who tried or disobeyed. So, the living were forced to carry the corpses of the dead until camp was made for the night. Here is our first poem, and it's written by Richard R. Birch. On the Trail of Tears, O my Cherokee brothers, why hang your heads? Why shame your mothers? So laughed wildly instead. We soon will be dead. When we lie in our graves, let the white eyes take the woodland we loved for hoe and for the rake. It is better to die than to live out a lie in so narrow a sty. Years after the Cherokee had been round up and driven down the Trail of Tears, John G. Barnett reflected on what he and his fellow soldiers had done, saying, "School children of today do not know that we're living on the lands that were taken from a hapless race at bayonet point to satisfy the white man's greed. Murder's murder, and somebody must answer. Somebody must explain the streams of blood that flowed in Indian country." Another Georgia volunteer remarked in 1870, "I fought through the Civil War, and I've seen men shot to pieces and slaughtered by thousands. But the Cherokee removal, that was the cruelest work I've ever done." And finally, we have this poem from Charles Henderson. It comes from the year 1890, and it was told by a soldier who was 80 years old at the time, and it was his birthday. In 1838, President Jackson did decree that all the Cherokee must move west and give up their lands to the white man, even though he, Tasan La'ansanka, had saved Jackson's life in battle. On chill morning of October, 645 wagons took the 12,000 Indians. Chief John Ross led all in prayer. They were literate, Christians all, with written language, newspaper, and constitution like our form. Morning, November 17. Terrible storm of sleet and snow, no fire to warm the ground below. Dying of pneumonia from the cold, a trail of death for 1,000 souls. 1890, still near the deed, too near for young people to know the enormity of the crime. Murder is murder, however or whomever perpetrated, by the villains skulking at the night or to the martial music by day. Murder is murder, and who answers? Who must explain the streams of blood flowing through the Indian country? Who will mourn the 4,000 graves? Silent are the trail markers. I wish I could forget it all. The Trail of Tears was a tragedy of epic standing. To banish a people from their homes is a crime that can never be forgiven. It is part of this country's heritage, and it is a time that we can never forget. We must never forget. My thanks to those that survived that time and were able to share this story. I am sorry is not enough. Thank Debra for coming on the show today, and I look forward to your return. It was amazing. Coming up next week, we head to the world of the detective. Also, we have a story from you guys that is creepy, scary, and leaves you with so many questions. So until then, if you want to keep up with what's happening on Ron's Amazing Stories, please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, or sign up for the weekly newsletter. All the links you'll need are on the main website at raspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.